Well, if you've come back to listen to part 3, that means you must have enjoyed part 2 and are doing the work that helps you move forward and figure out what your next steps are. So in part 3, again, we're going to explore what community and friendship and belonging actually mean for you in the second half of life as you move forward. So I'm looking forward to this. Purpose does matter. So that's why this shift is important, because we're never meant to be alone. We're not meant to walk through life alone. So therefore, how do you find that community? How are you directed, either internally or externally, to take the next steps in what's your life and where you want it to go and how you want it to look? So, like and subscribe as usual. I always say that. Give me some feedback in the comments. And we are going to push on to part 3. All right. Welcome back to Aging is Direction. Again, I'm Cathy Clements, your longevity strategist. We are never meant to do life alone, everybody. Think about that. How many people do you know that are doing life alone? So, welcome back. We've already talked about purpose. We've talked about discovering who we're becoming in this second part of life, what this looks like for us. And now what I'd like to talk about is something that is just as important, and that's the people that we share this life with. If you've ever listened to this podcast for very long, you've probably noticed that I talk a lot about strength. I talk a lot about nutrition, a lot about movement on that whole physical wellness side, definitely about sleep and how to reduce stress. But here's something that I've come to believe over the years. You can have a healthy body and still feel lonely. You can have, excellent lab work and still feel disconnected. You can eat all the right foods, exercise every day, and take every supplement that you have discovered for yourself and still feel that something's wrong or something's missing. And because we are never designed to do this life alone, we were meant to be in community. Human beings are wired for that connection. And we need conversation. Have you ever found that you sit and talk to yourself if no one else is around? Okay, I raised my hand. I'm guilty of that, but I'll say I've never answered myself other than internally, trying to come up with what that answer is. We need laughter, not just conversation, but laughter. We need encouragement, because as much as you can push yourself and know where you want to go, sometimes you need that pat on the back or shoulder, or someone telling you, hey, you're doing a good thing. Even if it's unexpected, that's actually the best time to get that kind of encouragement. We need someone to celebrate with when life is going really well, and someone to sit with or sit beside when it isn't so good. So the life lessons, that we've all learned, what has life taught you? Well, one thing that I've learned throughout life, working for the military and in federal service, fitness, and simply in being human, is the strongest people are rarely the ones who insist they need no one. Hear that again. The strongest people are rarely the ones who insist they need absolutely no one. The strongest people are usually the ones who have built meaningful relationships. They know who they'll call when something wonderful happens. They know who they'll call when life falls apart for them. I've watched people endure tremendous hardships trying to balance family and work life and having it crumble, one or the other or both. The people who navigate those seasons, though, most successfully usually aren't the ones with the biggest bank accounts or the most impressive resumes. They're the ones who have people beside them. Some, people that are helping them and they're helping others. Someone, who will listen to them and someone they listen to. Someone who checks in on them. Someone who says, hey, you don't have to go through this all by yourself. How many of you have those? And I say those, but I don't really mean those. How many of you have just that one? Because it usually is not a whole load of people, but it's one or two people, maybe. And those people are a gift, whether it's one or more. They're a gift. And I think it's one that we underestimate as we progress through life. Loneliness and solitude aren't the same thing. So I know people that live in solitude and they're not lonely, but loneliness is something you can be in a room with 100 people and still feel lonely. I want to make an important distinction between those two things. Loneliness and solitude, as I just said, they're not the same thing. Being quiet, I got to tell you, is something that I actually enjoy. Not all the time, but sometimes. I enjoy mornings of a cup of coffee, doing my, devotionals, and to have it just quiet. It's my time to think. It's time to read. Or for me, it's my prayer time. It's time to, have no distractions at all. And I can tell you, the first time that I had to share that time with my husband, we do things differently. I enjoy spending time with him, but he listens to things and doesn't read things first thing in the morning. It drove me crazy. And I don't think I ever told him that because we have ultimately begun to share that time and enjoy that time together. He still does it his way. I still do it my way. But we are, finding our way through that time together. That's solitude. All right. And solitude can be incredibly healthy. It can be meditation. Some people like to meditate. I don't feel that I'm a good meditator. I think that's why I don't do it. I've even tried, and I can do directed meditation better than I can do the other, where you're self-directed. I find that I either my thoughts wander, or I fall asleep. And to me, neither of those is the direction that I'm supposed to go. I'm not sure who's judging me, but I guess I'm judging myself. But that's not the way meditation's supposed to be. So, but solitude can be incredibly healthy. Loneliness is different. Loneliness is that feeling disconnected, feeling unseen or unheard, feeling like no one really knows what's happening in your life. And I think, if we're all honest, we've all had a moment like that. I can tell you, yeah, I think I had at least 2 years where it felt that way. And I had to find a way to come out of that. And there's something worth remembering from that. You can feel lonely in a crowded room, like I've already said, and connection isn't measured by the number of people around us. It's measured by the depth of our relationships. Connection isn't measured by the number of people around us. It's measured by the depth of our relationships. So think about that. How many people really know you? I know that I'd say my circle of friends is very small, and that's not bad either. But friendships also change over time, right? When we're younger, friendships often happen naturally through school or through sports, or you're on the same bus together. They're your neighbor. And then as you get older, you go away to college with them, or they're your roommate in college. Then as an adult, maybe they're the people you're working with. They're your work colleagues. And then as you have children, you reconnect with a different group through your children's activities. So we kind of see people almost by accident, and you get to know them at varying levels through those different activities. But as we get older, something else changes. Retirement happens. So sometimes that whole group of work colleagues, just disappears. Or children, our children get older and they move away. So therefore, those relationships change. People relocate. In the job I had, that was one of the things that I loved and disliked at the same time about that job. We love to travel, still love to travel. But when you actually are not just traveling, you're picking up your whole house and you're moving somewhere, the distance becomes more difficult to stay close to people that you once were close to. Friendships, or friends can become caregivers, and therefore they either move away or their priority is taking care of maybe a parent or maybe a child. Schedules shift, and you just don't see each other at the same time. So you have to actually be conscious and make that time. But suddenly your friendships require that intention, right? You can't just accidentally have a friendship because you're scheduling things and you're making that relationship happen. They don't just happen anymore easily. Especially if you work out of your house, which a lot of us do, or you're in a small town, but you're on the outskirts of that town. Those kinds of things. So we have to create those opportunities to connect. We have to make the phone call or send the text message or invite somebody to come meet us for coffee or for lunch, or invite them over for dinner, right? We have to join that walking group or join a running group or a gym. We have to, be involved in our neighborhoods maybe to some extent, or attend a class. Especially if you're in a town that has community colleges or universities, huge. There's a huge older population that is now not getting degrees, but going back to learn different things and take different classes in those locations. I know one of the universities here, colleges here, teaches winemaking. Well, unless you're going for the certifications, and they do have certifications because I actually checked it out because that's something that I'm interested in. I thought, I don't, do I have the time? So it's something that you have to actually make the time for. And I didn't at the time. So, and now it's kind of I'm beyond it. But, or let's say you volunteer for something. So here we do have an older population in where we are currently. They have Meals on Wheels. I could volunteer for that. I, volunteer at, any kind of club that you can belong to So you have to put yourself out there and introduce yourself to others. And that can be uncomfortable, right? So, like, it was different when you were a kid. It just seemed easy, right? As an adult, sometimes it's not as easy, but it's definitely worth it. Definitely worth it. So, community, when you're attempting this, you have to realize community isn't just found, it's actually built. You have to build your own community. I hear people say, I wish I had more community. Well, then, and I understand that. But here's what I've learned: community usually isn't something we find, it's something that we build. One conversation, one invitation, one shared experience at a time. Think about it. The people in your life who matter the most of those relationships, they didn't become meaningful overnight. I have a girlfriend whom, so when we moved to Prescott, Arizona, I was looking to continue my business and to grow my business. Right then, I was doing personal training only, and some friends from my neighborhood had invited me to go on a an art walk to different businesses that were open for they'd open their businesses for walk-in business, which they didn't normally do. And it was a specific weekend, so we had to pick a day. We all go, and this one gal is helping out another one in her store, and she's just doing the register, and she's ringing up all the sales and that kind of thing. And I'm not even sure now how the conversation began, but she was the first person that I met that invited me to a networking group. That was in 2019. And from there, our paths keep crossing, to the point where we go out to dinner now as her husband and her, and my husband and me. And not just that, but then other couples have joined us as well. So maybe the actual meeting was happenstance, but then it was intentional on continuing, first a business relationship and then a friend relationship. So those relationships, again, they don't become meaningful for any of us overnight. They have to be developed over years. And it's funny, it depends on personalities. Some happen much faster than others, and some just take longer depending on your personality and depending on theirs. And that's okay too. So, and it's through those shared experiences or through, um, because this girlfriend and I, we just kept crossing paths because we were going to the same events or we were going to the same businesses. And so that is a shared experience. Even if we're not doing it at the exact same time, always, we're doing it and then talking about it. What about shared struggles? Especially as entrepreneurs, things don't always go, like like you would hope that they would go. Sometimes there are struggles, and it's through that struggle and you communicate with someone else who's going through the same thing that it is easier to then build that relationship. Or shared celebrations, having grandchildren or your kids getting married, or up in this where we are, people still exercise quite a bit. So there's a marathon, maybe you do the 10K and you all celebrate something like that. That's how you grow your community. Slowly, consistently. And just like everything else, we've walked through this season, it just takes a little bit of time, right? Nothing happens overnight. I don't necessarily like that cliche, but it's a truism, right? It doesn't just happen overnight. We have to work at it, and it has to develop. So here's something. I hope you've taken a piece of paper out, if you can, wherever you are listening to this. So who knows the real you? Here's some questions. Think about this, and I'll go through them slowly so that if you feel like jotting them down, you can, or you can, pause and write them down as you go through this. But who really knows you? If you were to say, this person would know all the answers to a quiz about me, who would that be? It's not your social media profile, right? It's not your professional title. Not the version of you that's always saying, I'm fine. Who knows the real you? Who knows what you dream about? Who knows what you are worried about? Who knows what brings you joy? Who would notice if you suddenly stop showing up? That's an interesting one, right? Especially if you are in a habit of networking in large groups or are in clubs or, in I call them clubs, but in associations that are larger. Who would miss you? Those are all important questions, right? Because genuine connection begins with being willing to let people know us. And that can be very vulnerable. I can tell you, I am probably hard to truly get to know. Maybe that's why my circle of really very close friends is small. I think it had something to do with my job. Everybody wants, and it's not a blame game. People say, oh, it's on my, the way I was raised. And it may be, maybe your family was, not isolationists, but they were just tight knit and they just they didn't talk to people as readily as others. But vulnerability is, I'd say it's becoming more acceptable these years, not in the second half of life, but 20, in the 2020s, if that makes any sense. I think people are used to people being more vulnerable, talking about their feelings, asking for help. And but you have to ask, I think, my personal opinion is you need to ask for it judiciously. You don't go out and blanketly ask people that don't really know you well. And most of the time, they're not going to respond anyway, especially if it's like a social media post. But it's, you have that group of friends that who you can actually ask, right? The dependable one, the one who, you may lean on or they may lean on you. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is allow someone else to show up for us. Sometimes that's not easy to actually ask for help, ask for someone to do something. So, what are those health benefits for connecting with other people? Well, one thing researchers, continue to discover is that meaningful relationships are associated with healthier, longer lives. So think about that. Why? Friends encourage us. They invite us to go for walks. They notice when something doesn't seem quite right. They celebrate our successes. They help us through difficult seasons in our life. Sometimes they're simply reminding us that we're not alone. And they're just asking us how we are. Have you ever noticed how much lighter a burden feels when you've talked about it with somebody that you trust and you've worked through a situation, even if you're not asking for their input, you're just asking to bounce an idea off of them, or you just need to vent, or, that kind of thing. It's almost a monologue at them until you say, well, what do you think? And you trust that the answer coming back at you is going to be something you can use, something that's beneficial to you. The situation may not have changed at all in the telling or the hearing, but you've done that. You've had that moment. And that's a powerful connection right there. So, how do you find that friend group? Well, I think first of all, you have to become that friend that you're looking for. You have to be that person. Does that make sense? So sometimes people tell me, I wish someone would call me. I wish someone would invite me to something. I wish I would, someone would check in on me. And those are great feelings. They're really good feelings, right? Now put them in reverse. Who are you checking in on? Who are you calling? Right? Who are you inviting out for lunch or to come over for dinner or to play cards or whatever, go shopping? So, what if you became that person? What if you made the first phone call? What if you invited someone to coffee? What if you sent the text message? And what if you checked in on your neighbor? One of the most beautiful things about kindness is that it often comes right back at us, and sometimes tenfold better than what we actually gave initially. And not always immediately, but eventually. So community grows when someone decides to go first. Isn't that crazy? Maybe not, maybe that's someone is you. Maybe it's not you right now. But I remember, telling my kids, well, we'll go ask that person to play or go ask, that kind of encouragement to a child. Children are more usually, more open to doing those kinds of things. Whereas if you were telling a friend, would you tell your friend to do the same thing? Well, go ask that person. Well, go do this. Not as much, right? So we need to be those encouraging friends that don't just encourage our friends in the good that they're already doing, but encourage them to expand that community that they're already starting. How about connecting across generations? I've already brought up talking to children. I think there's something beautiful about relationships that span generations, that spend time with someone who's older than you or someone who's younger than you. Listen to the stories. Everyone's perception on it could be the exact same story or situation, but your perception is different depending on the lens you're looking at it through and the age that you're at. So learn from their experiences if it's somebody that's older. And frankly, You can learn from experiences of someone that's younger than you too, and spend time with those people that are younger. They're, they'll challenge your thinking. They'll introduce you to new ideas, new technologies. They'll help you stay curious. And, we have things to teach them, and we all have something to learn. So that relationship can be very fruitful, very rewarding, as that give and take starts occurring. Age should never stop you from that exchange. So build your circle. And as you move into this second half of life, I think it's healthy to ask ourselves again, who am I becoming? And equally important, who am I becoming? Who am I becoming that person with? In other words, who's your community? Because the people around us influence us more than we realize. Do they encourage growth? Do they inspire kindness? Do they challenge you in healthy ways? Do they make you laugh? I hope so. Do they help you become the person you hope to be? How about choose those relationships carefully? They're the ones of the greatest, I'd say, yeah, they're one of the greatest investments you'll ever make. So that was part 3, and we're going to get ready to move into part 4. So for this final part, I'd like you to think about a few questions. This one might surprise you because we're talking about building community. Who do you need to reconnect with? Like I said, we've moved around a lot. I know that I've had friends in various, places. There are people I want to reconnect with. And I have begun to do that through social media, which is great. Next step is actually going to see them or having them come visit. Where could you begin to build your community? And perhaps most importantly, whose life could become better simply because you reached out to them, and vice versa? Who do you know that you feel like they could feed into your life too? And I don't mean financially at all. I mean intellectually, or, they just stimulate different creative thoughts that you could have. Sometimes changing someone else's day can also change your own. Isn't that a crazy thing to think? When you go thinking, well, I'm going to help them, in a reality, you walk away being the one that benefited the most from that interaction. I love that. And it happens without us really thinking about it. So, in our final part together, we're going to bring everything that we've talked about so far throughout this season together. We're going to talk about strength and nutrition. We're going to talk about stress and sleep, movement, purpose, and community. We're going to create a personal vision for the second half of life and talk about how to intentionally build a future that isn't defined at all by fear of aging, but by the excitement of continuing to grow and learn. Because the second half of life isn't a closing chapter. For many of us, It's where some of the best chapters are still waiting to be written. I'll see you in part 4. See you in the next episode.